Hello everyone, I hope you're having a wonderful day. Today, we're going to follow the night Jack races through the market and the pharmacy for one thing, saving Tu Tien from a dangerous fever before it's too late. If you enjoy the story, don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next videos. Late afternoon, light faded behind thin curtains and left a pale glow on Tu Tien's face. Sweat dotted their forehead, their breaths were shallow, uneven, like each inhale had to be negotiated with the fever. Curled beneath a thin blanket, Tu Tien lay still, eyes half closed, body drawn tight as if the cold inside them could be squeezed out by force. Jack stood beside the bed and pressed the back of his hand to their forehead. Hot. Too hot. The kind of heat that makes your stomach sink because you can't talk it down. Jack's throat tightened. He didn't complain. He didn't panic out loud, but worry lit up inside him like a match and turned immediately into resolve. He leaned closer. Tu Tien, he said softly. Can you hear me? Their eyelids fluttered. A faint sound came out, more breath than words. Jack swallowed hard and tried again. How do you feel? Tu Tien's lips parted with effort. My head still hurts, they whispered. So bad. That was enough. Jack straightened, and in that second you could see the shift in him, no longer waiting, no longer hoping it would pass on its own. Action, now. I'm going out, he said, voice low but firm. I'll be right back. Just stay warm. Tu Tien tried to lift a hand, weakly, like they wanted to stop him or apologize, but the arm fell back to the blanket. Jack looked at them one last time, fragile, burning with fever, trapped in a room that suddenly felt too small for safety. Then he turned and strode out. His footsteps echoed on the worn wooden floor, each step striking against the tightness in his chest. Outside, the world kept turning. People were cooking dinner, kids were laughing somewhere. The sky was still beautiful, but inside Jack, time had frozen on one image. Tu Tien on the bed, sweating and shivering, breathing like they were holding on to the last thread of strength. He grabbed the old wallet from the table and checked the cash. Not much. A few crumpled bills, some coins. It felt fragile in his hand, but right now it was everything he had to fight with. He pushed the door open. Cool evening air slapped his face, and for a second he welcomed the sting because it woke him fully. He walked away from the small house, tall figure cutting through the fading light, carrying one silent dread. What if the fever doesn't break? He refused to let his mind finish the thought. Only what needed to be done mattered. The village path stretched under a crimson sunset, turning his shadow into a long streak across the dirt. The hinges behind him creaked softly, like the house itself was whispering worry. Jack's hand stayed on the wallet in his pocket, feeling the thinness of it, feeling the sharp reality. Love sometimes comes down to what you can buy before night fully falls. As he walked, the image replayed over and over. Tu Tien curled on the bed, each breath too shallow, face flushed and drained at the same time. It sliced into him in slow, steady cuts. The wind carried damp earth and distant cooking smoke. It stirred memories of peaceful afternoons when Tu Tien was healthy, laughing beside him in the garden, teasing him for being too serious. Those memories felt like fragile dreams now, slipping away just when he needed them most. Jack quickened his pace. His heartbeat outran his footsteps. He kept scanning the road ahead, calculating time in a new way. Seconds mean fever. Minutes mean danger. He wondered if the market was still open, if there would be fresh vegetables left, if he could build a simple bowl of porridge that might help their body take medicine without vomiting it back up. Fear tried to creep in. What if I'm too late? What if the fever doesn't break? What if Jack shook his head sharply, banishing the thought like you slap away an insect before it bites? No room for weakness, no room to stop. Every step was a vow to the person waiting back home. The first street lamp flickered on, casting a sickly light across Jack's face, stern, eyes burning with determination. Ahead, the hum of voices and bargaining began to reach him. The market was still alive. The afternoon market buzzed with clamor. Buyers pushed through narrow aisles. Vendors called out prices. The air was thick with fish, herbs, spices, sweat, charcoal, smoke. To anyone else, it was chaotic. To Jack, it was a test. He wove through the crowd with an old bamboo basket in hand, eyes scanning stalls fast, searching for the simplest, most vital things: rice, scallions, a small portion of lean meat, a handful of sweet greens. He selected each item with deliberate care, as though each leaf and grain carried a silent prayer. A vendor greeted him, smiling, trying to make small talk. Jack answered with a tight nod, voice rough. "Scallions and sweet greens. Please, quickly." He paid, he moved, he didn't linger. The noise of the market became muffled in his ears because his mind was already back in the bedroom, listening to labored breaths. At a rice stall, he checked the sack like he was checking the weight of hope itself. He bought only what he could afford, then tightened the basket strap. The weight wasn't heavy, but fear made it feel like a stone on his shoulders. As he passed under the awnings, the last sunlight slanted through in golden orange strips. For a second, a thought pierced him so hard it stung his eyes. If Tu Tien recovers, I'll bring them here again. Together, choosing vegetables, laughing like before, ordinary mornings, ordinary worries. His vision blurred slightly. He blinked hard and kept walking. There was still one stop left. The pharmacy sat on a quieter street, tucked between shops with metal shutters half closed. Its pale blue neon sign flickered like a faltering heartbeat. Jack pushed the door open. A dry bell tinkled sharply. Inside, the air smelled like antiseptic and faint herbs. An elderly pharmacist looked up, silver hair pulled back, eyes kind but tired. Jack set the basket on the counter and kept his voice controlled, because if he let emotion rise, it would drown him. "Ma'am," he said, "I need fever reducers and supplements. High fever. Exhaustion." The pharmacist nodded, moved slowly to the back shelves, and returned with blister packs and small bottles. She spoke gently, practical. Dosage, timing, keep them warm, monitor temperature, bring them in if breathing changes. Jack nodded rapidly, hands shaking as he paid with crumpled bills. The medicine packet felt light in weight, but heavy in meaning. It wasn't just pills. It was time. It was a chance. Outside, the sky had darkened fully. Streetlights washed the road in yellow. Jack's face looked drawn, but a fragile spark of hope flickered under the exhaustion. He hurried home. The kitchen was nearly dark when he pushed through the door, lit only by one hanging bulb that swayed faintly. He set the basket and medicine down, then listened. From the bedroom, he could still hear Tu Tien's breathing uneven, but present. That sound kept him moving. He lit the gas stove. Blue flames leaped up. He rinsed rice carefully, poured water into the pot, sliced scallions thin, cubed the lean meat. Every motion was deliberate, like a ritual. The fragrance of rice began to rise, soft and comforting, blending with sautéed scallions. Steam stung his eyes, but he didn't wipe it away. Some of the moisture wasn't from smoke. He stirred the porridge, tasting it, adjusting, tasting again, afraid to make it too salty, afraid to make it too bland. He wanted it perfect because he felt powerless in every other way. When it was ready, he ladled it into a bowl and placed it on a tray beside the medicine. His fingers tightened around the tray handle. He drew a deep breath. Then he walked toward the bedroom, carrying warmth and hope into the room where fear had been living all afternoon. Jack eased the bedroom door open with his shoulder, careful not to let it creak. Warm hallway light spilled across the bed and revealed Tu Tien's face again, still flushed, still damp with sweat, but their eyes were open, unfocused, and heavy. Each breath came shallow and uneven, like it had to climb a hill before it could reach their lungs. He set the tray on the bedside table and sat on the edge of the mattress. The bowl of porridge steamed softly, filling the small room with a smell that felt like comfort and memory at the same time. Jack slipped one hand behind Tu Tien's neck and lifted their head a little. Even that small movement made their brow tighten. "Just a little," he murmured, voice hoarse from holding fear all afternoon. "Eat a little. It'll help." Tu Tien's lips parted with effort. Their eyes fluttered, as if staying awake was work. Jack scooped a spoonful, blew on it carefully, then brought it to their mouth. The first swallow was slow and cautious. Jack watched their throat move and felt his own chest loosen by a fraction, as if one spoonful meant the world hadn't won yet. He fed them steadily, pausing between bites so they could breathe. His hand trembled just enough to show how hard he was forcing it to be gentle. When Tu Tien coughed lightly, Jack froze, then leaned closer and whispered, "Easy, easy." With his sleeve, he wiped sweat from their forehead. The gesture was careful, almost reverent, like he was afraid the fever would shatter them if he touched too hard. In that small room, the world narrowed to a few sounds. The soft clink of spoon against bowl, the quiet swallow, the faint rasp of Jack's breath. Tu Tien's gaze shifted toward him. In their eyes, Jack saw exhaustion, pain, and a fragile gratitude that tightened his chest. He wanted to say something strong, something that would promise safety, but words felt thin beside the heat burning under their skin. So he kept feeding, because action was the only language that didn't break. When the bowl was nearly empty, Jack set the spoon down and reached for the medicine. He poured a small glass of water and helped Tu Tien sit a little higher. Their fingers were cold despite the fever. Jack placed the pill in their palm and closed their fingers around it like he was lending them his steadiness. "After this, you rest," he said softly. Tu Tien swallowed with small sips. The effort left them trembling, but they did it. Jack watched, then exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for hours. He tucked the blanket around their shoulders and smoothed the fabric the way a mother seals warmth into a child. Then he brushed damp hair away from their forehead and leaned close enough that his voice could be felt. "Rest now. I'm here." Their eyelids lowered again. Their breathing didn't become perfect, but it slowed. It steadied. The sharp edge of panic inside Jack didn't disappear, yet it loosened enough for him to think. He stayed seated, hand clasping theirs, passing warmth through cold fingers as the minutes crawled. Outside the room, the house was silent. No neighbors, no chatter, no festival noise, just a wall clock ticking somewhere far away. Jack listened to it and hated how ordinary it sounded, as if time had the nerve to keep moving while Tu Tien fought for comfort one breath at a time. At last, Tu Tien slipped into a lighter sleep. Their face remained flushed, but the tension around their eyes softened and their breaths began to even out. Jack rose carefully and drew the curtain back a few inches. Pale moonlight spilled in silver and calm, laying a thin strip across the floor. He looked at Tu Tien sleeping and felt a small pocket of relief open in his chest. He stepped out into the backyard. Night air cooled his skin. The garden lay quiet under the moon, wild grass sprouting around the vegetable beds, a bamboo fence creaking softly when the wind shifted. Jack found a small hoe leaning by the wall. It was ordinary, worn, familiar, and in his hands it felt like something grounding. He began to weed, not aggressively, not like punishment, like care. Each stroke was steady, gentle, as though pulling weeds from the soil could pull fear out of his ribs. Sweat beaded on his brow again, but this time it wasn't panic sweat. It was the sweat of relief slowly returning. As he worked, Jack's mind tried to build tomorrow out of small images. Tu Tien, waking without the fever, a weak smile, the two of them sitting in the garden with tea. the sound of laughter returning without effort. The picture was simple, but it was enough to keep his hands moving. The night wind carried damp soil and a faint frangipani scent. Jack paused and looked up. Stars were scattered overhead, indifferent and beautiful. He breathed in, deep and full, the way he hadn't been able to for hours. For a moment, he let the quiet soak into him, and he realized he was shaking not from fear now, but from the aftershock of holding himself together. He wiped his hands on his shirt and listened for any sound from the bedroom window. Nothing, just the steady hush of sleep. Jack drove the hoe into the soil one last time and straightened, shoulders aching in a good, honest way. He turned toward the house and saw warm yellow light spilling behind the curtain. It looked like a promise. He walked back inside, closing the door gently so the night wouldn't slam. In the hallway, he paused, head tilted, listening. The bedroom was still. He stepped in quietly and checked Tu Tien's forehead with the back of his hand. Still warm, but not burning the same way. Their breathing stayed even. Jack sat down in the chair beside the bed and let his eyes rest on their face. He didn't need to speak. Presence was enough. He stayed there, keeping watch, until his own heartbeat finally slowed to match the calm he'd begged for all evening. He set the thermometer on the table and checked it again, not because he expected a miracle, but because measurement gave his mind something to hold. The number was still high, yet not climbing. Jack poured fresh water into a cup and left it within reach. He folded another towel and laid it near the pillow, ready for the next wave of sweat. Every object he placed became a quiet shield: water, cloth, medicine, light. For the first time that night, he allowed himself to remember how the afternoon had started ordinary, almost peaceful until the fever turned it into a battlefield. He thought of all the times Tu Tien had cared for him when he came home stressed, the way she would cook without being asked, the way she would pretend she wasn't tired. The guilt didn't crush him, it sharpened him. He promised himself that when Tu Tien woke, he would not turn this into a lecture about rest. He would simply stay. Staying was the lesson. Outside, the wind pressed against the bamboo fence. Somewhere, a dog barked and fell silent. Jack watched the rise and fall of Tu Tien's chest, counting breaths until his own breathing matched. When Tu Tien shifted and made a faint sound, Jack leaned in, whispering their name, ready to help. But it was only sleep rolling them into a more comfortable position. The relief that followed was small, but it stacked into hope. Near midnight, Jack let his head rest against the chair back. He didn't sleep. He just closed his eyes and listened to the house holding steady. Tu Tien collapses with a severe fever, sweating and breathing in shallow gasps as Jack checks their burning forehead and refuses to wait. He rushes out under the fading sunset, clutching a thin wallet, driven by fear and love. At the busy market, Jack quickly buys rice, scallions, lean meat, and sweet greens for porridge, choosing each item like a prayer. He then hurries to a small pharmacy, urgently requesting fever reducers and supplements, and returns home under flickering streetlights. In the dim kitchen, he cooks carefully, stirring porridge with trembling focus, then carries a warm tray and medicine into the bedroom. Jack feeds Tu Tien spoon by spoon, wipes sweat gently, and helps them take pills with water, staying calm while panic burns inside. As Tu Tien's breathing steadies into lighter sleep, Jack steps outside to weed the garden under moonlight, clinging to hope that tomorrow will be kinder, then returns to keep watch through the night.